So I'll be talking today about making engaging online courses. And we often hear about how important engagement is of learners. And so I'm going to speak directly to that. So just to back up a little bit though, we're often told that there are really fundamentally two different approaches to how we communicate material when we're teaching. We can have student-centered materials, or we can have sort of teacher-centered materials. In other words, we have either the students are actively working with and engaging with the materials, or we have more of an instructionist approach where the teacher is communicating the information. Now, we have long been told that active learning is really where it's all at. That's where the student is actually getting that information into long-term memory. But there was a massive study done in 2006, which the title says it all: Why Minimal Guidance During Instruction Does Not Work. In other words, active approaches of the kind that we're usually used to, like constructivism, discovery, problem-based, experiential, and so forth, those have been shown not to work very well. So why do we keep pushing active learning? What's going on here? There's actually even a bigger conundrum. There was a paper published in 2014 by Freeman and Associates, and this one says, it's another massive meta-analysis that says completely the opposite. It says active learning increases student performance in science in the STEM subjects. So that is almost diametrically opposed to the other massive meta-analysis that I just presented you with. But if you look at the finer details of this, what you'll see is that in this study, the Freeman study, what was counted as active learning was anything that was 10% or more active engagement in the classroom. That meant if you used clickers in your class, you could be counted as having active learning, lots of active learning going on in your classroom. They didn't actually even measure how much time was spent in active learning. So what we often hear from people is something like this. We have lecture, we have 60 minutes of lecture or 2 hours of lecture, and students don't learn very well that way. And it's true. So then what we hear in contrast is that we shouldn't do that. We should instead have active learning. It should be active. But should it really be active? Should everything we do be active for that entire hour or 2 hours? How about something like this, where we have like a little bit of lecture, some active learning, a little bit of lecture, active learning, and so forth? This shows quite a bit of active learning. But what's the balance? Should we have maybe more lecture and less active learning, but still some of both? Or perhaps even just sort of mixed in almost the same amount of time for both? Any of these mix and match approaches, this is all called direct instruction. And depending on what perspective you come from, you can say this is all a constructivist, or all the teacher is giving this and framing this. But the reality is that it's a give and take between the instructor giving information and the students absorbing and actively working with that information. In fact, this name for this mixture of things, direct instruction, has a long and rich tradition, and it has been found to be one of the most effective, by far, approaches to use when you're trying to teach people. So let's explore this idea of direct instruction just a little bit. I want to give you a little bit of related background so you can understand what I'm driving at. When you're talking about something like STEM instruction, science, technology, engineering, and math, at least in the United States, the tendency has long been for decades to try to make these materials more engaging by making them more fun. So you throw eggs off of buildings, you do all these great experiments, and then you get to college and it's something of the math and science death march. So the thing is that is often forgotten is that there are different types of knowledge. There's different things that people have to learn. For one thing, there is something that I will call the easy stuff. And easy stuff is actually not all that easy, even if it seems easy to us. So, for example, recognizing faces. We can do that within days of coming out of the womb. We can start recognizing faces, but it's taken many, many decades for artificial intelligence to be able to do something similar. Likewise, we are pre-wired to listen to and absorb and pick up our first language. That is a tremendously difficult task, but we can naturally pick it up without even any real instruction other than just listening to it. Now, this easy stuff that's acquired so simply without even any explicit instruction, it has a sort of a formal name. It's called biologically primary knowledge by the individual David Geary, who devised these initial theories that have since borne up by many who are working in neuroscience. And all this easy stuff is as opposed to what I'll call the hard stuff. And hard stuff is stuff like reading or writing. Our brains did not evolve to read a textbook or actually try to write something. We never had to do that on an evolutionary perspective. And that perhaps is part of why conditions such as dyslexia, which make it more difficult to read, are so common. So it's also things like doing math. We're not geared to do mathematics. I mean, we didn't have to do it on an evolutionary basis. And what happens for reading, writing, and math is we actually push old ways of like learning and identifying faces and so forth. We push that to the side and we grow in new neural connections that allow us to expand on this capability and learn things like reading and writing and math. We actually have to rewire our brains, and it is not easy to do this. So we have to repurpose circuits that were initially designed, so to speak, to pick up other pieces of information. And this more difficult to acquire information is called biologically secondary knowledge. Now, what this really means for our purposes is you can't always make things just as fun as when kids were children. And you can't always teach everything by just having people engage with one another. Is engagement, as in the idea of speaking and working with others, important? Absolutely. But it's absolutely critical as well that you have a good explanation of what you're trying to teach in order to help students to start rewiring their brains. Now, so Gary's work has shown that in essence, if you look at the type of material that's being learned, you can have sort of on one axis, you could have the easy versus the hard stuff. And then so we've got the biologically primary versus the biologically secondary material. And then we can say, well, how does that correlate with the amount of direct instruction? That is, that way of teaching with a little bit of explanation, active learning, explanation, active learning, and so forth. what happens when we correlate with the amount of direct instruction, where it can be that direct instruction can be very low, which is in student-centered or discovery-based types of learning, or it can be higher, as in when the instructor is actually providing information along with active learning. As it turns out, when you look at all the data, it kind of indicates a trend like this. The more difficult the material, the more biologically secondary it is, the more important it becomes that we have direct instruction as opposed to only active learning, or as opposed to only lecture. Having this sort of a little mix-up back and forth is really quite important. So, of course, there are other factors that also have a bearing on how well students learn. For example, time or working memory capacity can have a big influence on how well you're able to pick up new material and how easy it is for instructors to reach students. So if we look back at that idea of direct instruction over a 1-hour class period, so notice I've got sort of a mix and match, the exact amount of time for presentation versus active learning. No one can actually give that concrete data because it depends on so many factors, and even individuals who are amongst the best of knowing about that interweaving of active and presentation, they don't themselves know what the proper percentage is. We just know that some of that back and forth is really important. So what this means from our perspective is, though, that if you look, there's kind of, let's just look at one of those little presentation pieces. That presentation piece is actually important. We've got the active learning piece, the presentation piece. What we often hear from people who are trying to encourage the production of better MOOCs is that we should be improving the engagement of students through enhancing those active learning squares, those portions of active learning. But actually where MOOCs excel is in their presentation. They can provide presentations that are world-class. So yes, we should be working on the active learning portions, but what people often watch is the videos. And there's a reason for that. And that is that your working memory, you can kind of think of it like an octopus. It creates sets of links, connections in long-term memory. And those sets of links are what you can draw up whenever you're thinking about an idea and you need to actually work a problem or speak another language or do that pirouette as a ballerina, should you so desire. The thing is that when you're looking at a video, that octopus of attention has approximately 4 pieces of information it can hold on to. Some of those that it can easily hold on to are verbal, what it hears. Others are visual, what it sees. If you have verbal and visual, what that can do is that can enhance the student's, that student can hold more information in their working memory because they've got the verbal, they've got the visual, and they can hold more in mind at once and learn more effectively and more easily. So in summary, I just want to say social engagement is critically important, but we have to make sure, sometimes people will talk about the importance of social engagement because it's really hard to make good videos. So it's a lot easier to just talk about, hey, we should be social engaged. We should, and they'll kind of put some documents online, have an interview, because an interview is a video, right? But they don't actually take the time to create good materials that give you that direct instruction, that presentation portion of what you need to be learning in order to learn something well. So be careful in your MOOC making that you're so involved in trying to engage your students that you forget that the very first thing that will engage them is if you make powerfully engaging videos that show them that you're actually going through the effort on your side. And so it's reasonable to expect that they can engage on their side. So remember, MOOCs especially excel at presentations. So build on that. Start improving those presentations. Keep in mind that idea that building something with a little movement, with attention to what grabs people, is what's going to help be the first thing that people will identify as something that is powerfully good about whatever you're trying to teach. So remember, it's time to start improving presentations. And with that, I thank you.